This week on Government Matters.
I hope the troubled launch of healthcare.gov can serve as a catalyst to drive positive change in the way we manage IT.
Could upfront governance have saved healthcare.gov? We'll ask former DHS CIO Richard Spires.
If you read between the lines, it says, maybe we're not going to use the commercial cloud. Maybe people aren't ready for it, and this is their way of kind of pulling back a little.
DISA will reassess the need for a $450 million cloud contract.
Silicon Valley woke up to the fact that they needed to have representation in Washington.
The NSA fallout makes tech lobbyists a hot commodity. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
Thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every Sunday we'll bring you the week's top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. In headlines, the sixth major congressional hearing on healthcare.gov. This time, lawmakers focused on the technical issues behind last month's dysfunctional rollout. Tech officials like Todd Park, Steve Van Rokel, and Henry Chow faced strong criticism, as Dana Bash reports.
A month and a half after its troubled launch, the healthcare website is still running at barely half its intended capacity. That from the White House's lead tech official.
We have much work still to do, but are making progress at a growing rate.
Todd Park, forced to testify by GOP subpoena, said he cannot guarantee the website will be fully functional by the end of this month, the White House goal. Republicans were eager to illustrate problems persist.
I went on my iPad and got to healthcare.gov, and I hit this button that says create account, and it doesn't go anywhere. And it just changes colors and does nothing. Sir, I respectfully am just a technology guy trying to...
Don't short yourself. You're the smartest one in the room.
Well, that's not true, sir.
Trust me, I've been in this room for a while. It is true.
A rare lighthearted moment during a hearing marked by intense partisanship.
This was a monumental mistake to go live and effectively explode on the launch pad.
Nobody in this room, nobody in this country believes that Republicans want to fix the website.
And then there was this.
The American people do not want to see a kangaroo court here.
No witness here today has been cut off.
But, Mr. Chairman,
every witness has been allowed to complete their entire answer.
But outside this polarized hearing, frustration is bipartisan. Democrat Jose Serrano is a loyal Obama supporter.
We've got brains in this country. Yeah. We've got people, we've got kids in college dorms that can invent Yahoo. You mean they couldn't have help with this?
Dana Bash reporting. This week, the Washington Post published a two-part investigative report about Microtech, a federal contractor based in Tyson's Corner. The series profiles CEO Tony Jimenez, tracks contracts won by his company over the past decade, and raises questions about Microtech's status as a small business. Microtech calls those reports misguided and misdirected. They released a statement to Government Matters on Friday. Here's an excerpt. Quote, "The story rehashes issues that have already been raised, answered and validated by government agencies. We agree that the federal contracting process can be improved, but the Post story conflated a system that can be hard to understand with one that is corrupt." National security and defense leaders met for Defense One Summit in Washington this week. The list of speakers included Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel. He addressed DoD's top priorities, Iran and the role of politics and military strength. Hatsavella has more.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel talking one-on-one about the challenges facing DoD. But first, addressing what he considers the main responsibility of his department, the security of our country.
Are you a non-interventionist?
Hagel called that a label and says everyone who knows him knows he's an internationalist.
Do I believe we should go invade and occupy everywhere? We don't get our way? No.
He says that's not what America is about, or how great nations solve problems.
I'm not an interventionist to the point where we use our military unilaterally, but I am surely an internationalist because that's our future.
Next up, Syria. Hagel thinks the parameters for meddling with problems of other countries are messy.
To be able to just frame up in a neat little way, these are the boundaries on when we use military force and when we don't. I don't think the world's that simple, nor do I believe we're drifting in that kind of a way where the world is going to get simpler.
Hagel says you have to start by finding common ground with adversaries, even Iran, who he admits caused trouble in the Middle East and continues to sponsor terrorism abroad.
Engagement is not surrender. It's not appeasement. An engagement is not negotiation.
Hagel says a secure country and military strength depend on a stable economy.
If a nation does not have a strong economy, then eventually you won't have much of anything because you can't afford it. You always keep a ready, capable military that is second to none in the world.
Politics, of course, can stymie diplomatic approach, but the former senator from Nebraska says he has great respect for Congress and its role in our democracy.
Congress reflects the people. That's the way democracies work. Democracies also are supposed to work based on consensus and compromise.
Next week, Secretary Hagel heads to Canada, where he will meet with defense ministers, security experts, and military leaders. Reporting in Washington, Hat Savella for Government Matters.
Deltek announced the acquisition of Centurion Research Solutions. Deltek says the purchase will make their GovWin IQ database stronger by adding more data on architecture, engineering, and construction. Washington Technology reports Deltek declined to discuss the purchase price. The company will add more than 50 employees. We'll turn from headlines to tech, straight ahead on Government Matters. DISA wants to take another look at its options for the commercial cloud. What's next for DoD's cloud broker? Jason Miller from Federal News Radio joins me next. In Tech Matters, DISA and the commercial cloud. This month, the Defense Information Systems Agency made a surprising announcement. DISA officials will reassess their need for commercial cloud services for non-sensitive data. Joining me with the latest on Government Matters is Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Jason, let's start with some background. More than a year ago, the Department of Defense released its first cloud computing strategy. In that document, DoD calls DISA their official cloud broker. Originally, what did they envision?
Well, think of a cloud broker as an insurance broker, somebody who's kind of the middleman. And what DoD envisioned was making DISA that middleman for cloud services. In many respects, they want them to say, okay, what does the Army need? What does the Navy need? And let us help you fulfill those needs. And part of the way they're going to fulfill those needs is by looking at the cloud offerings in the vendor community. So we're talking about Google, we're talking about Amazon, we're talking about Microsoft, we're talking about all the big players. And how can DoD, how can DISA specifically, be that middle person between the Army or the Navy or any other military services or agencies, as well as those contractors? So that was what they envisioned back probably about a year ago or so.
All right, let's fast forward now to this July. DISA began 4 months of planning and review for a $450 million cloud computing contract. What did that review entail?
Well, they put out a draft RFP, a draft solicitation for the commercial cloud. And the goal here was just basic market research. What is the current state of commercial cloud providers? And then they went out with the draft RFP, got comments on them, answered a set of questions, actually 3 rounds of questions, which actually is very typical for most RFPs, especially big RFPs that are worth, as you said, something to the effect of $450 million. Now, the other piece of this is they held an industry day where they brought in vendors to talk about what's going on. So all of this was built up for a final RFP that was supposed to be released sometime in the fall. And obviously with the government shutdown, things got pushed back a little, but that was their goal.
All right, so that brings us to the present. On November 8th, DISA posted a notice on fedbizops.gov. Here's an excerpt. This strategy may result in a solicitation for a new contract at a significantly lowered ceiling or the leveraging of contracts previously awarded, which contain the appropriate scope for meeting this demand. Translate that passage for us.
So basically what they were saying is, as they were doing their market research, not just with the vendors, but also with the military services and agencies, they found out maybe there's not as big as a demand for commercial cloud. And remember, in the commercial cloud, you can only put unclassified data. So maybe the military services are saying, well, we're not really comfortable putting even unclassified data in the commercial cloud, so therefore we may not actually even use it as much as we thought we would. And $450 million, I think it was over about 4 or 5 years, is a lot of money expected to be spent there. So maybe they're stepping back and saying, maybe this is not where we need to be.
All right, so the intelligence community built its own cloud computing infrastructure, the ICITE. Does that have any relation to DISA's notice?
It really doesn't, because the iSight cloud is really for classified or top secret data only. Now, DISA is building a private cloud, something for classified data that could potentially connect to the iSight cloud, but this is for commercial, and you definitely don't want to put, unclassified data or classified data on a commercial cloud. So they are two separate initiatives.
Exactly. Now, Jason, $450 million is a sizable contract, especially for cloud computing. Have you received any feedback from contractors? How do they feel about this announcement?
There's some unclarity about why DISA would need to go back and relook at their acquisition strategy when, in fact, they could just say, we're only going to spend $100 million, or we're going to spend $50 million, because the guarantee for the vendors under this contract is only about $5,000. So there's not a lot of money they're putting out there. So I kind of would assume there's actually something else going on. If you read between the lines, that says, maybe we're not going to use the commercial cloud. Maybe people aren't ready for it, and this is their way of kind of pulling back a little. Right.
We'll stay on top of this story. Thanks for being with us today, Jason Miller, executive editor at Federal News Radio. See you next time, Jason.
Thank you.
In security matters, tech lobbyists and the NSA fallout. Here's a quick recap. This spring, former contractor Edward Snowden started leaking secret documents about NSA surveillance programs to The Guardian and Washington Post newspapers. In June, the Justice Department charged Snowden with espionage. The White House denied his plea for clemency earlier this month. Those leaks continue to reverberate in both the public and private sectors. Now, lobbyists are involved. For more, we turn to our guest on Government Matters, Robert Efris, founder and CEO of Efris Federal Advisors. Robert, tech titans like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and Google are in the midst of what Politico describes as a quiet new lobbying push around government surveillance laws. What do they want?
The companies, Google and Microsoft, Amazon, all are seeking to urge the Congress to protect their sensitive data, to prevent the government from making intrusions that are occurring without their advance knowledge, and to ensure that their customers have the sense of privacy of their personal and identifiable information. And the Congress, in the midst of writing legislation, wants to hear from these companies to ensure that there are no gaps in the statutory remedies that Congress is seeking to execute.
As we're finding out, easier said than done. And in August, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation published an eye-opening study. They found that until now, the United States has dominated every sector of the cloud computing market. But PRISM could cost the industry as much as $35 billion by 2016. Here's an excerpt. The global enterprise public cloud computing market will be a $207 billion industry by 2016. While much of this projected growth was until recently up for grabs by U.S. companies, the disclosures of the NSA's electronic surveillance may fundamentally alter the market dynamics. Robert, that's a lot of money. You read this report. What do you make of it?
Well, just as world leaders don't like their phones being listened to, similarly, foreign governments which are looking to the leading U.S. providers to migrate their applications to the cloud want to be sure of the integrity of those transactions and of their data. And in the event of government eavesdropping, they will pick a European or other supplier from another country as compared to U.S. suppliers, and this would cause potential economic harm to those U.S. companies.
Every year, companies spend millions on lobbying efforts to help craft legislation and outcomes. For federal contractors, is this an activity only the big guys engage in, or can small to medium-sized contractors have an impact?
Originally, it was the big guys working in the Iron Triangle between the Pentagon, defense contractors, and the Congress. But since the Microsoft antitrust case in the late 1990s, Silicon Valley woke up to the fact that they needed to have representation in Washington. And now it's not just the big companies, the Googles, the Microsofts, and the Amazons, but many smaller companies are seeking to hire professional advocates to ensure that their voices are heard and that their views are conveyed to their members of Congress.
PRISM is only one hot-button issue for the IT procurement community. FITARA, the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative, the Cybersecurity Executive Order, and even immigration reform come to mind. Can contractors provide input, and how should they go about it?
Well, these are very relevant examples. One of my clients, for example, a software provider, worked with Congress in the 2010 timeframe when it was just beginning the drafting of cyber legislation to ensure that the software perspective on cybersecurity was addressed on equivalent terms compared to the hardware or network elements of the cyber infrastructure. So in many cases, congressional staff who are experts themselves are seeking to hear from contractors as to what the gaps are in the public policy approaches to address issues like cybersecurity, acquisition reform, and immigration reform.
Do you find that people on the Hill are willing to listen to your clients?
Very much so. Even staffers with strong expertise in the defense arenas, homeland security, and intelligence are very interested in hearing from contractors. Some of those stakeholders in those committees actually go out into industry, to Silicon Valley, seeking for solutions that will address what they believe are gaps in our nation's security and our cyber defenses.
It's great having your insight on government matters. Robert Efris, founder and CEO of Efris Federal Advisors. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. The rollout of healthcare.gov was a disaster, but it's a disaster that doesn't have to be repeated. What does it teach us about IT management? Richard Spires weighs in next. In Management Matters, the botched rollout of healthcare.gov. It highlights the importance of IT management. On Wednesday, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee held another hearing on healthcare.gov. Top federal tech officials, past and present, were called to testify. One of them joins me this Sunday. Richard Spires is former CIO for the Department of Homeland Security. Now he operates as an independent consultant. Richard, Wednesday's hearing included its fair share of political theater, but it raised legitimate concerns. I'd like to start with a brief comment from David Powner of the Government Accountability Office.
It's great, and I'm pleased that Steve and Todd and everyone's involved now, but we need that governance up front on important projects, not when things go in the tank.
He's referencing U.S. CIO Steve Van Rokel and U.S. CTO Todd Park. What do you make of that statement? Could upfront governments have saved healthcare.gov?
Morris, absolutely. When I look at a program, there are 5 key critical success factors that I evaluate, and that governance, the ability to have the right individuals around the table on a regular basis, the right stakeholders, including the business or mission owners, the IT, privacy, procurement, other key stakeholders meeting on a regular basis to understand the status of a program, to help a program, is critically important. And I think is one of the major failings that we see on healthcare.gov.
FITARA, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, was mentioned more than once during Wednesday's hearing, including by co-sponsor Virginia Representative Jerry Conley.
The lessons learned from this whole process on the website is that probably the biggest gap between the private sector and the federal government is when it comes to IT. How we procure it, how we purchase it. This has been true on a whole range of projects. A reasonable inference from that statement could be drawn that perhaps we do need some more legislation, some new legislation to free up some of the moribund rules.
All right, Richard, does healthcare.gov make the case for FITARA?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in IT reform, and while legislation alone won't solve all these problems, I think it will really help. Let me specifically address a couple of issues in FITARA that I think are particularly key. The first has to do with the CIO authorities. It's absolutely critical that we get CIOs in positions that they can be at the table, they can control the IT for the organization. It's not about controlling the whole organization. It's having the right balance between the business side and the IT side. When you don't have the right balance on these kinds of programs, that's when you get into trouble. The other thing about FITARA that I like is the fact that it tries to address this issue that we don't have as much talent in government as we need to run these kinds of large-scale programs. So what do you do in that case? This notion of creating centers of excellence whereby we could go and troubled programs, or even programs that are getting started, can go to a center of excellence and get help. Make sure they have the right kind of skill sets. They're using best practices. when they run into issues, they've got someplace to turn for knowledgeable feedback and help. And that's really an important part of FITARA as well.
All right, that brings me to the role of the federal CIO. This month, you kicked off a new series with FCW where you examine how government can improve IT management. I'd like to read an excerpt. In most instances, the agency CIO does not have control or oversight over all IT infrastructure, and in some agencies, the CIO has surprisingly little insight and oversight. Why is that a problem, and how do you solve it?
Well, it's a big problem. In today's world, when I talk to private sector CIOs, the ones that are successful and companies that are really leveraging IT, one of the key things that they've been able to do is get their arms around their IT infrastructure. So this is the data centers and the servers and the networks. And they drive both consolidation of that and standardization. And we just have not done that effectively across the U.S. federal government. And I'm not trying to say you could do it in just one place, but at least at an agency by agency level, you should be able to do that. And we need an empowered CIO at the agency level to drive that. Once you get that done, it makes deploying systems, new applications, new functionality much easier. And so in the end, you're gonna be a much more effective organization, a much more empowered organization if you do that.
Now, briefly, Richard, some have speculated that lack of authority was precisely why you left government. Was it?
Let me say this, sir. There were issues around the authority that I had. I was trying to drive exactly what I just described, and we were making very good progress. But there were issues as we were having more and more success. Not everybody, not all the components within DHS necessarily were open to that kind of consolidation.
It's good to have you on the program. Thanks for your being so candid. Richard Spires, thanks. We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. That's all for right now. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. Your week is filled with other matters. Save Sundays for us.